Welcome everyone to the Off the Grid series here on our Patreon channel. This is your humble recovering CI Officer Kevin Ship, coming from the Ascent Studio located somewhere deep in the southeastern United States, not even discoverable by Google Earth. I'm really pleased to have our guest on the program today on the Off the Grid series, Rick Austin, the author of Secret Garden of Survival, but that's not all that he's done. He's written 3 books, Secret Garden of Survival. My wife and I have these, The Secret Greenhouse of Survival and The Secret Livestock of Survival. These books are awesome. My wife Sue and I love them. As a matter of fact, they've kind of been a compass for a lot of the planting that we've done and our livestock, especially small animals. So get these books. I think they're one of the best out there that you can get your hands on if you're a new prepper, or even if you're an experienced prepper. You want to get these books. They're fantastic. Rick was featured on National Geographic Channel's Doomsday Castle, Doomsday Preppers, which you've seen. It's a great show. You ought to see it. It's cool. Been on The Daily Show, Galileo, which is German TV, PBS, Amazon Prime's Videos the Beast. That is the global economy. Amen to that. He's on the film Beyond Off the Grid. He was in Newsweek, American Survival Guide, and Mother Earth News, which we read and love. Rick is host of the Prepper Camp, the largest outdoor preparedness event in the country. And I can tell you, my wife Sue and I have been to that. It is an absolute blast. It's held, I believe, if I remember correctly, in September. And if anybody wants to attend that, I'd recommend that you get tickets way in advance because it fills up quick. But what a blast we had there. Rick was a host of Politically Correct TV, a constitutionally conservative viewpoints in a liberal world gone mad. Isn't that the truth? And Rick's the host of Secrets of a Survival podcast. Now, Rick's contacts I'm going to put up now before I introduce him here. And I'm going to put these up again at the end of the show. Excuse that sound. We just had a huge military aircraft fly over the studio here, which is interesting. We've even had a stealth bomber fly over here a few times. So that's what that noise was. Even though we're way, way in the middle of nowhere, they still fly over us. Anyway, back to the contacts. I'm going to have these at the end of the show so everybody can come back to this taping and plug into each one of Rick's contacts here. So with no further ado, let me introduce Rick Austin, I consider the man when it comes to Off the Grid. Well, Rick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too again. As I mentioned earlier, we went to the Prepper Camp, and you guys just do a phenomenal job. We had a blast. We learned a lot too. We went to a lot of the teachers and program events that you had there, and it was awesome. So, Rick, what I want to talk about on this show, starting off before we get into your books, which I'd love to do, is why you personally became a prepper. How it all started with you. And the journey kind of that you took to get where you are now.
Well, I've been a prepper and so-called survivalist long before they coined the terms. I was a Boy Scout as a kid, back when the Boy Scouts were actually the Boy Scouts. And, I've always been an outdoors sort of person. I grew up in New Hampshire, so kind of grew up with that Puritan, we'll take care of ourselves mentality, and lived through a number of storms and ice storms and snowstorms where you lose power for a week at a time, and you learned how to cook with wood, heat with wood. You actually stored your food outside in the snow because your refrigerator didn't work inside the house and you'd lose all your food otherwise. So, I've always been someone who's been sort of preparedness minded, always thinking about what could possibly go wrong, hoping for the worst, but hoping for the best, but planning for the worst. And, it's done me well because I've lived through a lot of things that a lot of people couldn't live through. And likewise, I spent about 20 years in Florida in the hurricane and lightning capital of the world, where you lose power for this, you lose power for a week at a time there, and now you're at 90 degree plus heat and 90% humidity. So, lived through a number of those hurricanes, and glad I'm not there anymore. But you know, it's the prepping thing sort of morphed into homesteading, because really that's what we're doing, and that's what we had planned to do for years and years and years. And we kind of moved things up, our timetable up about 10 years before we went off grid, after my wife was carjacked at gunpoint in Orlando and said, that's it, we're out of here. So we basically chucked everything and you know, bought some property in the Appalachian Mountains, and have never looked back since. So
that's fantastic. I'm a lover of the Appalachian Mountains. I'm a fly fisherman is my hobby, and spent a lot of time up especially in the Appalachian, and a lot in the Blue Ridge Mountains fly fishing. It is one of the most beautiful parts of the country. And I want to mention too here, your wife's got a book also. What is your wife's book, Rick?
She's got a number of books, but my wife is Survivor Jane. So if you go to survivorjane.com, you can see all of her books there. And she teaches people. She kind of came upon the idea of that website, survivorjane.com, and it has since become the #1 preparedness website for women, because she speaks in her writings like a woman to a woman, as opposed to, you know, I mean, she was frustrated when she was trying to find out about this prepping stuff, and, you know, she couldn't understand all it was all about guns and ammunition, and you know, she was much more interested in, you know, how she could teach other people to learn what she learned the hard way. And she does it in her sort of whimsical, comical tone. And you know, it's very well read, and you know, she's written a couple of books as well on how to prepare, and also you know, in sort of tongue in cheek, one of her books is, you know, what could possibly go wrong, and you know, kind of looking back at her days when she was a city girl and was totally oblivious to everything that was going on out there, and you know, trying to teach people not to be that way.
Well, we've got that book, and I love the cover. It's got two ladies with shopping bags walking out of the city as it collapses behind them. And we heard your wife speak too, and love it. She's an awesome speaker. And that's survivorjane.com, where folks can go and hook up with your wife and her books.
Yep.
Great. Fantastic. People ought to go there because, like I said, Sue and I love you guys and consider you the best out there in terms of prepping and off the grid. So that's wonderful. And the viewers know why I went off the grid. Obviously, it's pretty obvious if you go out and just Google me. I kind of came from the belly of the beast as a CI officer, and saw the corruption from the inside all the way to the top, which was quite shocking. So I came out, and I was a biologist. My undergraduate degree was in biology and a lot of ecology. So I'm kind of a conservative environmentalist, and I'm big on the environment. So my dream, even before I joined the CIA, was someday to live off the grid, especially with a composting toilet, which I learned about in one of my biology classes. And so here we are. It's funny how things work out, Rick, because we're in our little off-grid cabin here, and guess what I have? A composting toilet. So, and we just love it. Living off the grid is it's fun, it's exciting, you know, and with you guys, it's become a love of our life. Now, what I want to talk about as we switch over here a little bit, your first book, Secret Garden of Survival, since we've got a good chunk of time here. Can you give me kind of and I brought that up, and I'll bring it up at the end of the program here too, the Secret Garden of Survival, but can you kind of tell me the philosophy behind that in terms of planting fruits and vegetables and things? What is because it's fascinating, what is your concept there with the Secret Garden of Survival?
Well, I was kind of a gentleman farmer before we got off grid, and you know, I had apple orchards in New Hampshire, and I had citrus groves in Florida, and I did everything that you were supposed to do from a conventional standpoint to grow fruit and to grow orchards and vineyards, and you know, I would spray pesticide every 10 days and after every rain. And I would use fertilizer, and I would use weed killer and all the chemicals that you were supposedly supposed to use in conventional wisdom. And I still had scabby, wormy apples, just like every other apple farmer, and said, there's not, something's wrong with this picture. So when we were thinking about moving off grid, I started thinking about, okay, how am I going to grow food without all these chemicals? If I'm going to survive, I'm going to have to grow my own food. And, it's, as time has gone on, we've realized how unhealthy all that stuff is for you. Yeah. Genetically modified foods and everything that's going on with Roundup and Monsanto, which I was, I was an avid hater of Monsanto for years before they finally get caught with their hands in the cookie jar, killing people. So, I was looking for a way to be able to do all that, and also be able to learn how to live without refrigeration and electricity and everything else should the grid ever go down completely. And I kind of came upon this concept of permaculture. So I read a lot of books on the subject, and I did a lot of studying, and I talked to a lot of people who had done it. Unfortunately, the term permaculture has become bastardized. It's a marketing term that everybody's using, and it doesn't really mean what people think it means. So they're just trying to sell something. So I coined this thing called nature culture, which is basically the way nature's been growing food for millions of years without man's help. And you plant once and harvest for a lifetime. You don't use any chemicals, no fertilizer, no pesticide, no weed killer. And in fact, I kind of looked at indigenous people all over the world who had lived essentially without any outside influence for thousands of years. And most of those people were hunter-gatherers. So they ate small game. By small game, I mean things like rabbits and birds and that sort of stuff, things that you could kill and eat in one sitting so you didn't have to preserve it. Right. And they also picked fruit and vegetables. And, most of those people lived in environments where they could ultimately, all they did is walk by something and pick it. They didn't fertilize, they didn't weed kill, they didn't do any of that stuff, they didn't water anything. And most of the food that they ate from was food that was planted once and harvest for a lifetime. Yeah, so right. things like fruit trees and that kind of stuff. So, they were perennials as opposed to annuals, where, in an annual situations like your garden variety vegetables, where you've got to plant your beans and peas and corn and everything, and it's got a 3-month life cycle, and then it dies. You pick whatever you can get and hope that the weather wasn't too bad for it while it was growing, and then you start all over again the next year. And I actually hated traditional gardening because I couldn't stand the fact that you'd plant 3 seeds and then have to pull 2. And that seemed like such a total waste to me. And the whole thing of getting down on your knees and having to pull weeds and everything, it just didn't seem right. And what I discovered is that weeds are actually good. They're just misunderstood plants. And weeds are the first plants in a succession of plants, and they break up the soil, and they allow for aeration and microbes and water to get in, where other plants can then take over. So They die back, they provide fertilizer for the next series of plants. So, anybody that's a weed puller is actually setting themselves back a year by pulling weeds. So, and weeds are feed for, my goats. My goats love weeds. So, they provide me with all my dairy products. And also weeds are flowering all the time when nothing else is flowering in the garden, because the fruit trees kind of go through a cycle where they flower, the bees pollinate them, and then they don't flower again for the rest of the year. So the weeds are always flowering, and it provides feed for my bees, which provide me with a tremendous amount of honey. Wow. And honey is nature's perfect food. So I get about 60 pounds of honey per hive per year. Wow. And that's a great medicine, internal and external, and also just a great food, and we use it to sweeten and preserve just about everything. So
how many hives do you have, Rick?
got 6 hives.
6 of them, yeah.
Yeah.
So and you get 60 pounds a year per hive. So
I figured the retail value once upon a time was about $2,500 a year.
Yeah.
On a $700 or $600 investment. If you look at $100 per hive,
yeah.
You know, that's a pretty good return year after year after year. So
that's fantastic, and you're helping kind of bring the bee population back after. There's still a lot of studies on that. Roundup was one culprit that one study showed, and another study showed possibly a virus, but it looks like it comes down to pesticides. At least one study I read, and of course Monsanto, the monster, and Roundup were largely responsible in this particular study.
Yep.
Of the bee die-off, but the bee die-off is pretty serious, isn't it?
Yeah, and what people don't realize, and people still don't realize, is that if the honeybees basically pollinate about 70% of the world's crop for humans.
Yeah.
So human food, about 70% of the things that we eat have to be pollinated by honeybees.
Yeah.
If the honeybees die, it go extinct. Human beings go extinct 4 years later.
Yeah.
That's how serious it is. So.
Wow. Now, I want everybody to hear that as the honeybees go, so do we. So everybody join the movement to stop the poisoning of honeybees and address that, and get some hives yourselves, and plant some flowering plants for them to pollinate, like Rick is doing, and help restore that population. And Rick, you mentioned weeds. You know, my favorite weed has become dandelions. And you know, most people pull dandelions out and they hate them in their yards, and they despise dandelions. And dandelions are one of, as you know better than I, one of the healthiest things you can eat. They have so many vitamins and minerals. They were used. There was a big epidemic of scurvy. It was back in the 1950s, I think, and people were dying, getting very sick, and they cured the whole epidemic. People started eating dandelions and rid the U.S. or America at that time, pre-industrial America, actually rid it of the disease by eating dandelions. So I not only harvest dandelions in my yard, but I'm growing them in the dandelion gardens where people think we're nuts, you know, but it's good stuff. And I traveled to Slovenia in my previous life, and as we were driving down the road, I would see ladies and their daughters out picking dandelions in the pastures. And you go into Slovenia to a salad bar, and they've got a big thing of dandelion green. So our culture has become so industrialized that we've kind of lost good things like that, you know. So very important piece of weed there, very healthy. Well, back to permaculture. So and back to the weed thing. So you started with weeds as kind of the beginning natural nutrient, and then you went from there.
Yeah, well, the first thing I did is I'm in a 100-plus-year-old oak forest, mature oak forest. Oh. So it's kind of gone through its cycles and maturity, and we cleared off less than half an acre on which we have our 60 animals, and our home, and our greenhouse, and our garden, which is, you know, essentially a permaculture food forest. And we grow every fruit tree, every nut tree, every berry bush, and every herb that'll grow in the area. And what I discovered from my research is that really all of these things are in little tiny ecosystems. So if you start with a fruit tree, it starts off small and then grows up and then creates a canopy under which is shade. So over time it grows up, and then there are certain other plants that like that shade, and they essentially move in on their own accord, and there's a symbiotic relationship there. Outside of that canopy is full sun, and that's where you grow your bushes like blueberries, blackberries, elderberries, that kind of stuff. And then outside of that layer, this is like concentric circles. Yeah. Outside of that layer is your herb layer. So there's your medicinal herbs and cooking herbs. And because herbs are flowering all the time and they've got these little florets, they're always attracting your pollinators. So that helps pollinate your berries and also your fruit trees because it's bringing them in. And also it attracts predatory wasps, which kill the bad bugs that you don't want to have on your berry bushes and your fruit trees. So it actually is like a defensive perimeter around your fruit.
Yeah.
And, you know, and all of that has a symbiotic relationship with each other, and they all grow better together than they do by themselves.
Yeah.
And you get vines like passion fruit, or you've got vines like grapes. And grapes, hate to break it to people, but you know, there weren't always trellises out there. There are no trellises in nature, and grapes naturally grow on trees. And I've got all kinds of photographs that show that grapes and apples are growing together in a symbiotic way, and both grow better together than they do by themselves. So
I have to tell you too, my wife and I have followed your example, and we grew grapes on the typical arbor, like you see alongside the road, and just after reading your book, we're starting to grow them on our fruit trees now, and that's really an awesome idea. You don't need trellises, and of course they're more wild, and in your case, you don't see them. You can't.
Yes, exactly.
When things get rough and people don't have any food to eat, the shelves go dry in the grocery stores, people can get kind of crazy. And in Germany, after the Third World War, what happened was the wealthy Germans, if you read the history, the wealthy Germans were going out to the farmers and giving the farmers their gold to get the crops that they were growing naturally outside of the city. So, it's critically important when things happen, whether it be a hurricane in Florida. I've been there, spent a lot of time in Jacksonville, and you get a thunderstorm and high winds almost every night. But it's important. And in your case, in ours to a lesser extent than you guys, because you're so much better at it than we are, when things go bad and the shelves are dry, even a good person, when their children are crying for food after a week, can become someone else. And there's going to be robbing, there's going to be looting, and then people like happened just in Venezuela, the robbers and the thugs, they leave the city and actually went out to the farmers and broke into the farmers' houses and killed some of the people there and stole their things. There's no police around. Right. So just because we live out in the country doesn't mean, if this happens, we're completely safe, because seen that happen. But
well, and one of the beauties of this whole system is that everything's growing together, everything grows into each other, and it's not like looking at straight rows, which is an obvious bullseye on your farm if you're growing things in straight rows, because the people realize, oh, there's food growing there.
Right.
In my case, if anybody could get up our mountain, they'd see what we're growing, and it would just look like overgrown underbrush, and well, there's nothing to see here. And move on. And, it's my contention that most people in these days and times wouldn't really recognize food unless it was in a package with a label on it. So, and I've got stuff growing literally in plain sight that you just don't see because it's all camouflaged and, it's all growing together. So,
well, I can tell you, if you go to your book, which I'm showing here on the screen, Secret Garden of Survival, you got a photograph in there of your nature cultural garden that you're talking about. And if you're walking down the road and that photograph is in there, people need to get that book and look at it. You wouldn't see that your fruits and vegetables are there because it just looks like an overgrown area of the woods that people, if they were hunting for things to pilfer, they'd probably just walk right by it.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you said something else that I want our viewers to remember. You did this on a half an acre.
Right.
So if someone's going to be and we're on, let's see, we've got 8 acres, but our little cabin and farm here is probably on about a quarter of that. And so if you're out there, someone, and you're thinking about prepping, but you don't have a lot of land, you don't need a lot of land. You can buy a half an acre. Well, I know down here deep in the southeastern United States, you get a half acre pretty cheap. But you get a half acre of ground or an acre of ground. That is all you need to live off the grid and live comfortably. And if you look at the pictures in Rick's book, they've got a really abundant life there on that amount of property. That's really, really important, I think, for people to know that you don't have to have a lot of acres to do this.
And in season, depending upon what, everything, fortunately, everything comes in succession. So, first it's the strawberries, then it's the raspberries, then the blueberries, and then, eventually the peaches and the pears and the apples. If I had to pick everything all at once, there'd be no way I could do it. But fortunately, it's not like that because things mature at different times. So, but still in season, in the summertime, when I'm harvesting, I'm bringing in 6 to 12 gallons of fruit every single day. And it's unfortunately my wife's job to have to preserve all that stuff, dehydrate all that stuff. And at some point in the middle of the summer, she screams, "Stop, I can't take anymore. I've been working 18 hours a day." Yeah. So, I hate to admit it, as a prepper, we get 3 freezers. So when it gets to be fall and we're not harvesting anything anymore, then we can preserve all that stuff with, whether it's canned or preserves like jellies and jams and that kind of stuff, or it's, dehydrated. We have lots of food and storage to get us through to well past the next harvest season.
Yeah.
Which is essentially how all old farmers used to be back in the early 1900s when everybody grew their own food. They always had to have enough to get through the year and until the next harvest.
Yeah, exactly right. And they never had to worry about the grocery shelves going dry or
right.
And, like you said, almost a year's worth of food stored away. And I want to say something here too that's kind of interesting. There's a guy who wrote the book "Surviving Off the Grid." I'm trying to remember his name. What a great book! People should get that and read it because it's really, really cool.
Michael Bunker. Michael Bunker. Yeah.
I want to give him a plug here. People should get that book, "Surviving Off the Grid." And he's a purist, kind of. I mean, they go all the way with no technology and complete living by themselves, and I admire that. But technology is the microphone that I'm using here for this program. We all have technology, and what I like to do is use technology for off the grid. Sue and I live on a solar-powered farm. Everything's powered by solar panels. That includes the well pump, all the lights, the outer buildings that we have, everything. And that's technology, but it's good technology. So I blend kind of off the grid with technology, and I think that's a great thing to do. We have a freezer, we got a refrigerator. It's all solar powered, all off the grid. So I have great respect for is it Michael Bunker?
Michael Bunker, yeah.
I have great respect for Michael Bunker. Yeah. Maybe someday I'll get to meet him. He's pretty cool. But so he does it the purest way, which I kind of admire. But we kind of blend technology with off the grid here. So okay, back Rick to what you're talking about now. You have, and I know in your book you talk a lot about small animals, higher in protein and more bang for the food and effort that you put into it. And I saw the picture, which Stu and I loved, of you hauling, I think hauling a Christmas tree. Mm-hmm. Your goats are chewing on the end of it while you're pulling it. And then we saw, you showed this at the prepper camp, your goats jumping up and down off, I think it was an overturned bucket or something. But talk to us a little bit about the secret in terms of livestock that you guys do on your off-the-grid farm.
Well, I've really taken a different approach than the traditional approach, and I did it for the same reason in the same ways that I did for the garden. I said, well, wait a minute, in a grid down situation, you're not going to be able to grow food the traditional way. And, as a prepper, I'm concerned about hiding things in plain sight. So the garden helps me do that. My greenhouse helps me do that. And the livestock choices I've made are all about return on investment and, having things that don't take up a lot of space, don't require a lot of work, don't require a lot of feed, and give me a lot back. So I really took an approach on this book, Secret Livestock and Survival, how to raise the 10 best choices for prepper and homestead livestock. And most people, when they think about, starting a homestead or a farm, they're going to get chickens and they're going to get a cow. And what they don't realize is that a cow requires 2 to 5 acres of open pasture or 40 pounds of feed a day.
Whoa.
And you know, that's a lot of investment to
Yeah.
get milk out of an animal when I can get a gallon and a half of milk out of three small Nigerian dwarf dairy goats that only come up to my knee.
Yeah.
They don't take up a lot of space. They don't eat a lot, and in fact, they would rather eat weeds than anything else. And you don't need 2 to 5 acres of open pasture, which again is another giant bullseye on your property.
Right.
And if we did have a grid set down situation, just like you're saying, good people will become bad really quickly. And if they're hungry and their children are starving, they're going to shoot your cow and they're going to eat a little bit of it and leave the rest to rot. And now you're out of milk. So
Yeah.
I like the fact that, you know, my goats would just as soon be in the woods eating leaves off the ground and off of trees and weeds. And they're producing all of that milk for me every single day, which again is my wife's job to move the milk, as she says. So she's got to turn that gallon and a half of milk every day into cheese, mozzarella cheese, cheddar cheese, cream cheese. I get a lot of cheesecakes. She makes the best ice cream in the world. It's 50%
Yeah.
more butterfat than cow's milk.
Wow.
So you know, we get some. When people come visit here, they love being treated to our ice cream because it's just so creamy, and they can't believe it's goat's milk
At a gallon and a half a day.
from three small little dairy goats that only come up to my knee. Yeah.
Yeesh. That's phenomenal. That's awesome. And I have to tell you, Sue and I have been talking about this. We haven't done it yet, but kind of following your lead, I think we're going to get some goats. We got a lot of pieces of the property down here that they could actually clear out for us, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But so you get a gallon and a half of all of that, and then you're not living off the grid and eating dry leaves. I mean, you guys are living good. You're having things that taste good, and the desserts that
Mm-hmm.
you were just talking about. I remember you sharing with this at prepper camp. The desserts that your wife makes are, you know, as good as anything you could have for dessert you could get at the
Yeah,
store.
we don't want for anything. I mean, you know, back in the day when we lived in the big city, we used to go out to eat all the time, and you know, we had mozzarella cheese sticks as an appetizer. Well, my wife can make that stuff now.
Yeah.
You know, in the summertime when I'm working on my next book or I'm working on prepper camp and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm starting to doze off at the desk, I suddenly see and have this milkshake given to me made out of our ice cream and milk, and you know, it's a good pick me up, and I don't have to go out anywhere. I don't have to pay $5 for a milkshake, and you know, it's good and healthy too.
That's phenomenal. And I mean, you're one of the best examples. I think that the off the grid life, the prepper life is it's an abundant life. It's
Mm-hmm.
fun. You're not just eating healthy, but you're eating well. And,
Yep.
and
Right.
you know, it's you know, it's a phenomenal life for anyone. And a point I make a lot to the folks out there is you don't have to have a lot of money, and you don't have to have a lot of land to start this off. You can start small, which is probably a good idea. And one of the things just I would humbly recommend based on our experience, if you're starting a new off the grid farm, move there before you go full off the grid. Move there or camp there on the weekends or stay there for a few days and get used to the surroundings and how things grow and what's happening, because all of these kind of myths, well, we'll move into the woods and then I'll hunt deer for food.
Right.
Not deer almost went extinct during the Depression because people cleared them out, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to have deer to eat probably. So we learned a lot by mistakes. Frankly, this studio here, humbly, I built, and I'm sitting in a little studio deep in the woods. Although we do get big military planes fly over here sometimes, and you know, I'm a fan of military. I love planes, but as long as they, you know, are behaving themselves.
Right.
But this studio is a completely off the grid studio that we built and set up, and eventually I'm going to probably get another background. That all the diplomas you see in the back are just for people who doubt, you know, what we're talking about, what I'm saying. But this is all off the grid. It's all built. The wood that you see is Georgia pine. One of the things I've tried to do is build this farm out of the surrounding materials. It's kind of I don't know if you remember the Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous architect, and his theme was to build the houses, the beautiful houses that he designed out of the surrounding woods and rocks of where that
Mm-hmm.
house was going to be. And so I kind of remembered that, and we used Georgia wood for all of the walls here, and we've used the vines for the door handles, and everything from the woods here we've tried to use to build the farm. And later on, I show people the off-the-grid toilet is out there on this channel for people to see, and the chicken coop with the composting garden in there that the chickens stir up for us and fertilize for us. Anyway, it's really fascinating and fun to do this stuff, and you have to start out knowing your land, knowing the environment, knowing which way the sun comes up and goes down before you plant your garden. Hang out there for a little bit before you do that, knowing your soil. Shoot, here where we live, the soil stinks, and so we put horse manure in there, and we have to kind of create our own rich soil by adding dead leaves and horse manure and tilling that all in and letting it sit for 6 months or so. Because here in where we live in the southeast and near the coast, the soil's kind of sandy and loamy, and you try to grow stuff on that. You move off the grid and you say, hey, we're kind of in a forest, which is kind of in the northern part of this state. But if you move off the grid cold and just start out, you're gonna have kind of an awakening.
Well, yeah, and I encourage people to take a look at, where is the sun in the sky, and how in relation to where you want your land to be or your home to be. I mean, the best thing and the greatest return on investment is having a home that takes advantage of passive solar, where basically you're using windows and the sun to heat your home in the wintertime. And since the sun is higher in the sky in the summertime, you're not getting overheated. And my next book that I'm writing is Get Off the Grid Starting Now, and it really talks about construction techniques and footprint and how to really set up your retreat or your off the grid or homesteading home so that you have the best return on investment. You don't have to use that. And my greenhouse is actually an integral part of that, because that not only grows food 12 months of the year, and even when we have 33 degree below temperature here, I'm growing citrus and coffee trees. How many times have you heard somebody say, I'd die for a cup of coffee? Well, I'd rather be trading that in a grid down situation than trading them with bullets that they can shoot me with. Yeah. So, we're growing all that stuff and exotics in the greenhouse, and, that also feeding us in the wintertime and our animals in the wintertime. And, I grow things like barley grass in the wintertime in the greenhouse, and that feeds pretty much everybody, all of our livestock. And that's really, really simple. And I've got a great video on that and a number of other things, including the greenhouse. But the beauty of the greenhouse is, from an engineering perspective, is that we can take all of our gray water from our home and use that to water our plants in the wintertime in our greenhouse. And likewise, because it gets hot in the greenhouse, I can bleed that heat off and that highly oxygenated air, because plants give off oxygen and humans give off carbon dioxide, and plants breathe carbon dioxide, take that in. So there's a symbiotic relationship there. And we don't have that, even though this is a very, very tight house with spray and isolene foam insulation. We don't have the sick house syndrome that you typically get in the wintertime. Especially if you're in the Northeast, and we don't get shocks from walking on the rugs with our socks on and that kind of stuff. So it's really comfortable, and it's all about really building things the right way and sort of outside the norm of what you see in construction today.
Now, Rick, can you explain to our viewers that don't know what gray water is?
Sure. It's everything except your toilet water. So ultimately, it's the water you take a shower with. It's the water that you wash your dishes with and you wash your hands with. And we've got perforated tubes that go around this U inside of our greenhouse, where it's a planter that's 3 feet off the ground. So it's easy for us to be able to harvest and attend to our plants in there, because we don't have to bend over, don't have to get on our hands and knees. And, so we've got the plants growing in there. We've got the sun coming in there. We've got thermal mass storage because these planters are made out of literally bulletproof concrete. That stores a tremendous amount of energy from the sun during the day, gives it off evenly at night. So we never have to heat the greenhouse, no matter how cold it gets in the wintertime at night. So the plants, we don't lose the plants in the winter. And like I said, we grow exotics, like citrus and coffee trees in the greenhouse. So it keeps us in food and makes us nice and comfortable in the wintertime when otherwise we wouldn't be. And our backup source of heat is a wood stove. And I think maybe I used it 4 times last year. Wow. Everything else was from the sun, all for free.
Now, and Rick, you have pictures of some of this in your books, don't you? Your greenhouse and
Yep. Yeah. In the greenhouse book, and like I said, I'm working on another book about get off the grid starting now, and that talks about a lot of techniques, again, sort of outside the norm. And because I grew up in the construction business, where my dad's claim to fame was back in the 70s, he was the largest installer of solar heat and hot water systems in Northeast.
No kidding.
So so I learned a lot, and that was back when technology wasn't nearly as good as it is today. And I tried to apply all that, and as technology improves, I've used a lot of that in my home too. So, like you, we've got solar electric, and I power my entire barn with solar electric, and I keep them cool in the summertime because we do get into the triple digits here, and it's pretty humid. And, I don't want to lose livestock because of that. So, we've got a lot of innovative technology that's really simple, that anybody can do to, cool off their home and their barns and, keep themselves safe and their animals safe too.
Yeah, fantastic. And as you do, we've got, Sue and I have kind of a system of redundancy here. Well, we've got the solar power. Of course, we're completely off the grid. We've got the solar panels, which, by the way, solar panels, they've improved on those as far as technology goes incredibly. We hit 100% power with our little solar system at about 12 noon during the summer. We got 100%. We're running everything. But if the solar goes down, we've got propane heaters that runs from a tank through a hose into the house as a backup. And if we run out of propane and something happens to the solar, then we've got our wood burning stove in there, and we can function off of that. And we've had, we live kind of in the middle of this particular state. So we thought we'd be free from hurricanes like you experienced down in Florida. We thought, hey man, we're in the middle of this state, down south, we're good to go. And then that last blooming hurricane, this was last year, comes right up the middle of our state to our farm and knocked down 4 oak trees. You can't even, one of them you can't even get your arms around. Of course, we were praying, Sue and I, and that thing came right through our farm, laid these oak trees back in the woods down like dominoes, missed our barn, missed everything, thank God. But we got a hurricane in the middle of the South, a southern state away from the blooming coast. So you just never know. But we had that system of redundancy in that hurricane, and when things went down, we recovered because we had planned ahead. Like you guys have done so much better than we have. You can handle just about anything.
Yep.
So, well, I want to put your books up again so people can see them. You have got, and I can't recommend these high enough because they're well written, expertly written. You've got a lot of real good photos in there that you show people how you did things and what they actually look like, and it's fascinating stuff. And as a kind of closet biologist, I just love this stuff. And people are probably noticing I'm smiling more in this interview than I do in most, because I absolutely love this stuff. I recommend everybody get these books. The Secret Garden of Survival, The Secret Greenhouse of Survival, The Secret Livestock of Survival. Sue and I have read them all. We love them. As a matter of fact, Sue and I consider Rick the man when it comes to off-the-grid stuff. And he hosts the Prepper Camp. Tell us about the Prepper Camp, Rick, that you do I guess at the end of the summer.
We hold, this will be our 7th year. And because we were on Doomsday Preppers, my wife and I, Survivor Jane and I, were on Doomsday Preppers and Doomsday Castle. And because we were, for lack of a better term, almost royalty in the prepper world, we ended up doing the speaking circuit all over the country. And most of these expos that they had, 8, 9, 10 years ago, they were run by guys who weren't preppers themselves. They were essentially promoters that were looking to make a buck on the next latest craze. And it was all about, making the vendors happy because they were the ones footing the bill and selling stuff. And, they give away the tickets for free or $1, and you go to the Denver Convention Center and there'd be 5,000 people in there, butt to butt, elbow to elbow. And, we were there really more as a draw for them than anything else. So, we taught some classes at those things. And what we discovered when we were watching people is that most of these people, yeah, they were interested in buying stuff, but first they wanted to understand what they needed and why they needed to buy this or that or the other thing. And most of them were interested in being educated. So, we kind of looked back and a bunch of us who were on the speaking circuit said, we'd like to create an event that we would like to go to. And, in an environment where you can actually practice these preparedness skills, like making a fire, those kind of things. You can't do that in a convention center. So we looked for a venue to be able to do something, and we came up with the idea of Prepper Camp. And it is a 3-day total immersion event in preparedness. People come from all over the country to attend. You can camp there. People are dragging, trailers from California for a week to get there, and then spend 3 days there and then, drag the trailers back another week. It is a great event, and we have great speakers who give of their time. They come from all over the country too, and they are the best experts in their field. And we have 64 classes a day for all 3 days. And, it goes from everything from, how to do trauma and triage in an active shooter situation to, how to grow a camouflage food forest, to how to gather intelligence in a situation where, suddenly you've got civil unrest all over the place. So if you go to preppercamp.com, you can see the list of classes and the teachers that we've had. We still got 2019 information up there because we haven't released the 2020, but I've got probably 20 new classes this year from people that include everything from how to fight with a machete, which is probably one of the easiest farm implements you can find anywhere, and most people get killed by machetes all over the world. So you can defend yourself with that too, to how to be a blacksmith. So, we've got all of that kind of stuff going on, and people, just come away from that experience, not only with a tremendous amount of knowledge that they can go and share with their groups back home, but it's also a great place to buy a lot of really innovative products because we do have a vendor area there. And the thing that amazed me the most was the atmosphere and the aura and the camaraderie that people experienced there, which I never expected. It's a very, I don't know, it's like God is looking down and looking over us when we're there. And, the people are just really good people. They're not a bunch of people with tinfoil hats like most of these people expect. They're just good, honest, hardworking people that want to take care of themselves and their family because they're responsible. So, it's a great event and great people. And it's a tremendous undertaking for us because we spent 10 months working on that event for a 3-day event. But, you know, it's a great time and everybody loves it. And, you know, had unbelievably tremendous reviews from people and podcasts that have been, and, you know, go to preppercamp.com and look at the sidebar and you can see some of those podcasts that people have done who have been there, who are, you know, singing its praises. So.
Oh yeah, and Sue and I went, and you know, it's not a, like you said, it's not an event where you see these wacko people, you know, toting firearms and pushing the apocalypse, and you know they're going to fight back with sandbags. No, it's the exact opposite. I mean, we went there and we met people from all over the country, and these are some of the best people you could meet, from carpenters to lawyers to recovering CI officers like myself. I mean, people from all walks of life, and some of the coolest, nicest, most well-balanced people, patriotic people you could ever meet. You meet there at Prepper Camp, and people need to sign up. I know it gets filled up fast, and you have a capacity that you can't go over. So people got to jump on that pretty quick because the tickets go fast. But people, everyone out there watching this, if you can make it and you can get in early enough to get a ticket and a place, do it, because it's life-changing, really. When you see the kind of the best of America, in my opinion, in terms of people, you're going to meet at Prepper Camp. So, and let me, while I got you, Rick, let me put up on the screen here some of your contact information. Okay, I'm going to leave these up on the screen for people to see here for a few moments, and then you can come back and watch this program because it's taped and it's on patreon.com/Kevin_ship. So you can come back and see Rick's contact information anytime you want on this particular program. And the best way to catch you, Rick, if people want to go on right now, what would be the best website for them to check out?
You can go to secretgardenofsurvival.com, and that'll give you links to the books and some other information on, you know, the whole process of, you know, how we produce food here. And the other one is preppercamp.com, which, you know, will give you all that information on Prepper Camp and the dates, which are, I think, the last weekend of September this year. And that is also in the Western North Carolina Appalachian Mountains, in a beautiful, beautiful setting.
Yeah. Beautiful place. Yeah, well, people go to that website. Like I said, Rick Austin, in terms of off the grid and prepping, is the man. And I don't say that lightly. Rick Austin, thanks for joining us today. And everybody go check out Rick's site. And Rick, God bless you. And thanks for being with us.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Right. Thanks. And everyone, we'll see our next program on Off the Grid here on patreon.com/Kevin_ship. And if Rick will allow us, we'll have Rick on again. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.